Chord symbols can be pretty confusing. A weird mix of letters, numbers, sharps and flats, almost as mysterious as Egyptian hieroglyphs to the untrained eye. It's further complicated by the fact that there are different conventions for writing chord symbols. And on top of that, the same set of notes can often be interpreted in different ways. But don't worry, in a few minutes, I promise, things will be much clearer. First of all, every chord symbol begins with the chord's root note, which is the harmonic center. Of course, the root note can be a white key like C or G, but also a black key like F sharp or A flat. If the chord symbol consists of nothing but a root note, that indicates a major chord. So here we have a C major chord, a B flat major chord, and an F sharp major chord. For minor chords, we simply add a lowercase m to our root note. So now we have a C minor chord, a B flat minor chord, and an F sharp minor chord. By the way, if you're not sure how to build major or minor chords, I've explained all the necessary music theory basics in previous videos, and you can find the links in the video description. Let's talk about numbers. To understand how they are used in chord symbols, we'll put a number on every note of the C major scale, from C to B. 1 is our root note, which is always written out, so you'll never see that number in a chord symbol. All the other numbers can be used, some more often than others. For example, since both major and minor chords consist of the root note, the third and the fifth, we won't need to add these numbers to our chord symbols, unless these notes need to be altered in some unusual way. The next important thing to understand is that per default, all of those numbers point to a note in the major scale of our root note, with one exception. Thanks to the importance of the dominant 7th chord, the number 7 refers to the minor 7th. So whether we're looking at a major or minor chord, when we add a 7 to the chord symbol, it means we're adding the minor 7th in both cases. Just as a side note, generally the size of the letters doesn't matter. It can be a regular number, superscript, or even subscript. The meaning stays the same. Now, if I want to add a major 7th to my chord, I have to make that clear in the chord symbol, which is usually done like this. So here we have a C major chord with a major 7th and a C minor chord with a major 7th. Please note that the major abbreviation has nothing to do with the chord's quality. It only tells us what kind of 7 we need to add to our chord. The number 6 is also quite commonly added to both major and minor chords, and it always refers to the major 6th above our root note. So here we have a C major chord with a major 6th and a C minor chord with a major 6th. Sometimes you might see a number in a chord symbol with a sharp or flat in front of it. That means we need to raise or lower that note by a semitone. For example, if you see a flat 5 in a chord with the root C, it means you need to lower the 5th G by a semitone. Likewise, a sharp 5 means you have to raise the 5th from G to G sharp. However, it's important to understand that the sharp or flat in the chord symbol doesn't tell us whether the altered note is a white or black key. It only tells us how this note has been altered from its regular position in the scale. For example, the 5th in an E flat major chord is B flat. Since a sharp 5 tells us to raise the 5th by a semitone, we need to play B natural instead of B flat. Let's talk about chord quality. You already know how to write major and minor chords, but there are chords that are neither of those things. The first example would be so-called power chords, which consist only of the root note and the fifth, without a third that would determine the major or minor quality of our chord. It's most commonly written by adding a 5 to our root note. Then there are suspended chords, where the third is replaced by either the second or the fourth, which is indicated like this. If the number isn't specified in the chord symbol, that means you're supposed to replace the third with the fourth. Finally, there are augmented and diminished chords. While major and minor chords consist of a major and a minor third, an augmented chord is built out of major thirds only. Basically, it's a major chord with an augmented fifth. Conversely, a diminished chord is built out of minor thirds. You can think of them as minor chords with a diminished fifth. Quite often, diminished chords come with a seventh, and here it gets a bit complicated. A fully diminished seventh chord consists of minor thirds only, so it includes a diminished seventh, which is the same note as the major sixth. This can be confusing, but fortunately, this is the only case where the number 7 doesn't refer to the minor or major seventh. Of course, there's also a diminished chord with our regular minor seventh on top. That's known as a half diminished chord, or a minor seventh chord with a diminished fifth. For extended chords, we need to extend our scale and add 3 more numbers to it: 9, 11, and 13. This might seem strange at first because we already have those notes in our scale, number 2, 4, and 6. However, by adding them again an octave higher, they become extensions of the 7th chord, and we're basically stacking thirds on top of that. So a C9 chord implies a C7 chord, with a 9th added on top. Of course, it works the same way with minor chords. So here we have a C minor chord with the same 2 notes added above. If we want a 9th chord with a major 7th, we add the major abbreviation to our chord symbol. The confusing thing here is that even though the chord symbol seems to say major 9th, the major in the chord symbol actually refers to the 7th, which is not written out. So the only difference between these 2 chords is that we switch from a minor 7th to a major 7th. All the other notes stay the same. To play an 11th chord, we stack another third on top of the 9th chord. So a C11 chord means we play a C9 chord and add the 11 on top of that. Now, you might notice that this chord sounds a lot more dissonant than the previous one, and that's because there's a lot of tension between the third and the 11th. So in practice, the third is often left out. Sometimes that's even made explicit in the chord symbol, but usually that's just up to you to decide. Just like before, a major 11 chord means that we need to play a major 7th, while everything else, including the 11th, stays the same. Finally, a 13th chord means we take our 11th chord and add the 13 on top of that. Now, you might ask, what if I want to add one of those higher notes to a chord without all of the implied notes in between? Well, we do that by simply adding the word add to our number. So here we have a major chord with a ninth added on top, but without the 7. Once again, ninth chord with the 7th, ninth chord without. Of course, all of those extensions can be altered by adding sharps and flats to them. A pretty common example would be a 7th chord with a flat 9 on top. Another example would be a chord like this, meaning we play a C13 chord, but then the 11th is raised by a semitone. A slash chord is used to indicate a specific bass note. Generally, a chord's root note is its foundation. So if we have a C something chord, our bass note will be C. However, sometimes the bass note is supposed to be different from the root, and in such cases, a slash is added to the chord symbol, followed by the bass note. That could be a note that already appears in the chord. For example, C over E can be read as the first inversion of a C major chord. But it could also be a note that's not part of our original harmony and adds a new flavor to it. Just to avoid any confusion, sometimes a slash symbol is used between two numbers. In this case, it doesn't have anything to do with the bass note, it's just a different way of telling you to add both the 6th and the 9th to your chord. Let's do a quick review of all the numbers you might encounter in chord symbols. 1 is never used because it's our root note. 2 appears in suspended chords, or it could be added to a major or minor triad. 3 is usually implied by the chord's quality, so we only need it when the 3rd is supposed to be left out. 4 is used just like 2. 5 is used to indicate a power chord, or when the 5th is diminished or augmented. 6 can be added to any minor or major chord, sometimes in combination with other numbers. The same is true for the minor 7th and the major 7th. 9 is usually an extension of a 7th chord, but it can also appear with a major 7th, a 6th, or just being added as a single note to any chord. The same is true for 11 and 13. The order of the notes isn't fixed. Usually you'll put the root note in the bass, but aside from that, you can arrange them in any order you like. And as a matter of fact, that can make a chord much more interesting. Let's take a C minor 11th chord in its root position. Now let's take the same 6 notes, but spread them a bit across the keyboard. Quite a difference, don't you think? Intervals don't sound the same across the keyboard. A whole tone sounds quite alright here, but much more dissonant down here. Likewise, a major chord sounds great in the middle of the keyboard, but it sounds pretty muddy down here. As a rule of thumb, if you're playing lower than an octave below middle C, you want to avoid any interval that's smaller than a 5th. Not all notes in a chord are equally important. For example, in a dominant 7th chord, we need the root, the 3rd to determine the chord's quality, and the 7th, which gives us that dominant 7th tension that wants to resolve to a different harmony. The 5th might make the sound a bit richer, but it doesn't really add anything important. So if you're supposed to play a C7 chord and you play just these 3 notes, you've done the job. The rules change when you're playing with others. For example, if you play piano in a jazz combo, you might want to leave the bass notes with the bass player and play chords without their root. Thank you for watching. I really hope you found this helpful. If you're interested in more of my educational videos, some of them should be visible now. If you want to support me, you can like or subscribe, or even visit my channel. I'm pretty sure you'll find something that interests you there. I wish you all the best for your very own musical journey.